5 years ago, a school bus carrying 7 cheerleaders veered off a rain-slicked road and burst into flames deep in the forest. No bodies were fully recovered, just fragments, and a quick official conclusion: a tragic accident. But one mother refused to believe her daughters had simply vanished into ash and smoke. Then a torn scrap of fabric and a weathered journal surfaced in the woods, bearing 5 haunting words: "We are still alive, somehow." On the last night of December, the Riversong High School cheerleading squad had just finished a joint performance at a neighboring school about 80 kilometers away. On the old yellow bus, 7 girls squeezed together between the seats, their hair in high ponytails, their uniforms still bearing a few streaks of paint from the afternoon's cheerleading routine. Outside the window, rain pattered, each drop hitting the glass as if trying to break through and touch the elation that still lingered in the hearts of the 16-year-olds. April Green turned to look at her twin sister Amber, squinting and smiling. Amber smiled back, sticking her tongue out playfully, her hand still scribbling something on the fogged-up window. "When we get home, I'm telling Mom about Rachel slipping off the stage," April said. The whole bus erupted in laughter. Kira pretended to faint, and Rachel cried out, "You can't tell. Anyone who tells is betraying their friends." Everything on the bus at that moment was just laughter and music from the small radio the driver had turned on for the girls to relax. No one paid attention to the rain, which was becoming heavier. No one saw that the road ahead was slippery, a gentle slope leading into a treacherous curve through the forest. And certainly, no one, not even the driver, realized that the wheels were beginning to lose control. The news arrived around midnight. David was in the living room, reviewing the newspaper article that April had brought home earlier in the month when the phone rang. Marissa was in the kitchen. She stopped mixing batter, her eyes drawn to her husband, a chilling premonition running down her spine. The voice on the other end was trembling and halting. An accident. The bus carrying the cheerleading squad had plunged into a ravine. West Forest. There was a fire. The situation was unclear. Rescue teams were on the scene. David gripped the phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Marissa stood motionless in the kitchen, the mixing spoon falling to the floor unnoticed. Both of them rushed out of the house, taking nothing with them but the names of their 2 daughters echoing in their heads like a desperate refrain. April. Amber. April. Amber. The scene was hidden among a winding stretch of forest road. The rain hadn't stopped and the flames from the bus had been extinguished. All that remained was the charred, twisted wreckage of the bus, half of it buried deep in the rocky gorge, the other half hanging precariously as if about to fall completely. The smell of burnt rubber mixed with the scent of damp earth and lingering gasoline made David want to vomit. Marissa couldn't cry. She stood frozen, her hands clenched so tightly together they were bleeding. "There are some bodies, but they're not intact," a police officer said, his voice softening when he saw Marissa's empty gaze. "They presented some pieces of fabric, a charred athletic shoe, a piece of blood-stained uniform. The names of the girls were read from the cheerleading squad roster. 7 names, none missing." David walked away from the crowd, toward the dense bushes where the flashlights of the rescue team were glancing. He didn't know why he was going in that direction. Perhaps it was because of the clicking sound he had just heard. Or perhaps it was a father's intuition. And there, under a clump of trees nearly 20 meters from the scene, he bent down and picked up something small and black, a scorched flip phone. On the back cover, the letters AG were faintly visible, engraved with glitter gel pen. April Green. David turned back toward Marissa, a pang shooting through his chest as if someone had just squeezed his heart. The days that followed were an endless sequence of funerals, tears, and silence. The families of the victims held memorial services. Hundreds of people came to light incense, embrace each other, and weep. Some brought white flowers, some brought cakes, as if they could soothe the loss with familiar gestures. Only Marissa refused to sign the death certificate. David said nothing, just sitting for hours in his daughter's room, playing and replaying a recording of Amber singing at last year's festival. "She can't just disappear like that," Marissa said, speaking for the first time since the memorial service. "Not my girls. Not April. Not Amber." Riversong High School released an official statement. The accident was due to rain, slippery roads, and the driver losing control. A concise conclusion. The Traffic Investigation Department confirmed there were no signs of foul play, no need for further investigation. The driver had also died. No one left a statement. The case was closed within 3 weeks. But Marissa couldn't sleep. David couldn't stop remembering the look in April's eyes the afternoon before, a look as if she wanted to say something she hadn't had time to say. And in every vague dream, they saw themselves lost in the forest, hearing a faint call echoing from somewhere deep within. "We're here, Mom, Dad." They didn't believe in that death. They didn't believe in such an easy conclusion, and deep in their hearts, they knew this wasn't over. It was never over. 3 months after the accident, snow began to fall on the roof of the Green family's house. The small wooden house outside the city still had its lights on every night, even though no laughter rang out from the second floor, where the room of the twins April and Amber used to be. Marissa no longer tended the garden as before. She began the habit of standing in front of the window every morning, looking out at the withered rose bushes under the snow. On the coat rack next to the window hung a faded blue athletic shirt. It was April's shirt. She didn't wash it, didn't fold it, just hung it there, as proof that her daughter had been present, had been alive. Every morning, Marissa reached out and lightly stroked the embroidered name, April G. On the chest of the shirt, her hand trembling, but her eyes never softened, not because of anger, but because something within her couldn't let go. David was no different. He had returned to his job teaching science at the local high school, but he no longer had the same enthusiasm. He watched the female students running around on the field, their hair tied high like April and Amber used to wear, and his heart suddenly felt heavy. One evening, while cleaning out her daughter's room, Marissa opened April's old laptop. The black screen lit up with a pale light, accompanied by a slow startup sound. Marissa didn't know why she turned it on. Her hand just touched it, like an unconscious reflex. In the drafts folder, there was an unsent message titled, "Mom, I need to talk." The content was empty, blank. But that emptiness made Marissa even more suspicious. And she knew something wasn't right here. April never left letters blank. She was always careful, writing everything clearly and neatly. A letter with only a title, saved in the drafts folder, on the very morning she went to perform. Could it be that her daughter had intended to say something? Something she didn't have time to say? Marissa printed the screen, folded it carefully as if it were evidence. And that night, for the first time in many weeks, she spoke up. "David, do you think maybe we missed something?" The two began to review all the documents related to the accident, reports from the police, images of the scene, witness statements, forensic conclusions. But it all seemed like a packaged script. Everything was strangely neat. No signs of alcohol, no survivors to testify. Driver dead, car burned, end. David said, "If all the kids died at the same time, then why were only a few body parts found? Where are the bodies of the others?" Marissa was silent, then said as if answering herself, "And why? Was there dried blood far from the car? And April's phone?" They decided to contact the school, hoping to review security camera footage or bus records, but all they received was reluctance. "The data was deleted according to procedure," the office worker replied, avoiding eye contact. "Once the police have concluded, the school has no authority to reopen the case." David asked, "When was that bus last serviced?" The worker glanced at the clock. "I'm sorry, I don't know. The archived records have all been moved to the old storage room." Something, it seemed, was preventing them from telling the truth. During a visit to the old school grounds, Marissa encountered the music teacher, who had been close to the girls. The woman had a look of panic in her eyes when she saw Marissa. "You're still coming?" the teacher asked, her voice soft. "I just want to know, something isn't right, is it?" Marissa replied, gently but sharply. The other woman was silent for a few seconds, then said softly, looking around, "There are some things no one wants to dig deep into, Marissa, because digging deeper will only hurt our hearts more." And she walked away quickly, leaving Marissa standing there, pausing for a few seconds as if trying to ponder the words of her music teacher. That night, David drove to the ranger station. He needed an outsider, someone not bound by the school, the government, or pressure from public opinion. That person was Nathan, an old college friend, now working as a ranger in the area of the accident. They drank coffee in the small wooden shack in the middle of the forest. The scent of pine lingered in the cold air. "It's been a while," Nathan said, pouring coffee. "I heard about it. I'm very sorry." David didn't beat around the bush. "I don't believe the kids died like that. Something isn't right." Nathan looked at him for a long time, saying nothing. Then he slowly nodded. "Okay. I can't investigate, but I can keep an eye out. If I see anything strange in the forest, you'll be the first to know." David shook Nathan's hand. His eyes looked straight ahead, as if he placed all his hope in Nathan. That night, Marissa sat alone in the living room. April's athletic shirt was still in the same place. The yellow light shone obliquely, making the name April G. appear as if someone had written it with light. She reached out, once again touching each thread of fabric. "You're not silent like everyone thinks." "I know," she whispered. Outside, snow was still falling, software thick, but in Marissa's heart, a corner was thawing. 5 years had passed since the night Marissa and David received the news about the accident that year. 5 years. No one mentioned the girls' names again. No one talked about the bus that burned in the rainy night. No one asked why 2 of the bodies on the list couldn't be identified by DNA. The school changed principals. The local police rotated personnel. The children who used to be classmates had grown up, had their own lives, perhaps had forgotten the cheers of the cheerleading squad from that year. Only Marissa and David had never left that year. That morning, Nathan was patrolling the northern part of the forest, an area rarely visited because of its rugged terrain and dense vegetation. He stepped through the damp moss, his eyes carefully watching every mark on the ground. A ranger's job is sometimes not to find human footprints, but to listen for unusual things from the silence. Something caught on his shoe, a piece of cloth, old and wet. He bent down. It was part of a shirt, blue like a student's athletic uniform, faded but still clearly sewn. On the corner of the fabric, a single letter was embroidered, tilted. Amber. Nathan stood still. In his heart, a blunt knocking sound echoed. Not fear, but an instinct signaling signs of living people and that they had once trudged through here. Not far away, under a small rock crevice, was a second object. A notebook with a faded cover, the paper inside wet and blurred, but one page still had legible ink. "We're still alive, but don't know for how long." Signed, April G. Nathan squatted on the ground. His palms trembled. Over the years he had helped David search countless times, mostly just animal tracks, old campfires, empty cans, footprints of hikers. But this was evidence. Clear and painfully suffocating. David's phone rang in the late afternoon. He was cleaning out old books in the garage when the screen showed the name, Nathan, Ranger. "David," the voice on the other end was hoarse. "I need you to come up here immediately. I think I found something." David didn't ask further. He just said, "I'm coming right away." Marissa said nothing, just took her coat and followed her husband. On the top of the rocky slope where Nathan was waiting, they saw what he had found, the piece of fabric embroidered with Amber's name and the notebook, carefully placed in a protective plastic bag. Marissa reached out and touched each letter as if afraid they would disappear. David read the line, repeating the words, "We're still alive." Marissa didn't cry. She just stood there, her eyes as if piercing through the entire forest, going back to the past, where her daughters might have been somewhere, waiting, hoping, enduring. "We have to report this to the police," David said. They did just that. The police's reaction shocked them, not because of rejection, but because of their cold indifference. "There's a conclusion. There's no reason to reopen the case," the young lieutenant said, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. David placed the piece of fabric and the notebook on the table, carefully as if surrendering his own flesh and blood. "Have you seen this? My daughter's name. The words say they're still alive. Isn't that enough to reopen the investigation?" "We don't have the authority, and 5 years is too long," the other man replied. Marissa looked at him, her eyes like cutting knives. "What if this were your child?" No one answered. No one looked at them. No one heard the cry for help behind those old ink lines. They left the police station in silence, not because they ran out of anger, but because their hearts now had no room for anger anymore. Only emptiness and a whispering fear. If the police don't do anything, who will? That night, Marissa sat in front of the computer. She typed the names of every independent detective agency, every retired investigator's address, every obscure name on missing victims forums. David called an old friend who used to work in forensic pathology. "I need someone who isn't afraid of losing their job," he said. "I need the truth, not apologies." And the journey began from there. No sirens, no search warrants, no justice stamped from the system. Just a couple, with empty hands and a flicker of hope that was painfully fragile. Before going to sleep, Marissa carefully placed the notebook next to her pillow. Although it was old and tattered, although the handwriting was blurred, she read each page as if reading daily scriptures, each word a stab of a knife, but also a piece of rope pulling her from the abyss of despair. She looked at David, asking softly, "If they're still alive, what have they been through?" David didn't answer immediately. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then replied, "I don't know. But I know one thing. Our daughter fought." April was able to write those words. That means she never gave up. Marissa turned away, trying to hide the first tear that had fallen after many months of dryness. She pressed the notebook to her chest, as if holding her daughter who had vanished in the forest. And for the first time in many years, Marissa whispered, "Wait for me, April. Wherever you are, I will come." The morning was gray. The sunlight didn't seem brave enough to weave through the dense trees. The wind whistled softly above, and below on the ground, each footstep stepped on the thick carpet of leaves, making a wet sound like the sigh of the forest. David went first, holding a map that Nathan had marked from the area where he found the notebook. Marissa quietly followed behind, not taking her eyes off each tree trunk, each rock as if searching for a familiar sign from her daughters of yesteryear. They didn't know what they were looking for, but they knew why they had to look. After 2 hours of trekking through the forest, they stopped to rest under a large oak tree. Nathan took off his backpack, gave Marissa a bottle of water. David bent down to wipe his forehead, but his eyes still looked ahead, where there was a sparser area of the forest, seemingly where someone had passed through. Nathan pointed. "I've been through here several times, but I've never paid as much attention as that day." And as he said, behind the dry bushes was a narrow space, like a place that had been used by humans. There, they saw scraps of fabric, a woolen glove with only half left, and what made all 3 people stand still. An old bandage, stained with dried blood, wrinkled as if it had been tightened around a wound. Marissa sat down, her hand trembling as she touched the edge of the bandage. She couldn't speak. In her head, fragmented images overlapped each other. Her daughters groaning in pain, small hands bandaging each other in the darkness, and the question that never subsided. Which of them bled here? And did anyone die in this place? David looked around, expecting something else, but the forest was still silent. They continued to go deeper. Nearly an hour later, next to a decayed tree trunk, Nathan stopped. "Here," he said. "I remember this." On the tree trunk, words were carved with a sharp object. maybe a knife or anything metal, mottled over the years, but still legible. No one is coming. We're still alive. Lily isn't breathing anymore. Marissa burst into tears. She couldn't stop the tears. Her hand shook so much that she couldn't hold the phone she was holding up to photograph the line. David stood behind, wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding her shoulders that were shaking. If they're still alive, and waited 5 years, that's hell, David said softly. Not hell, Marissa replied, choking. A grave that no one wants to dig up. By noon, they came to an abandoned wooden shack, a lopsided structure with a rusty corrugated iron roof, leaning on a mound of earth. The wooden door was blocked from the outside with stones and had to be opened with a crowbar. When the door burst open, dust flew everywhere, the smell of mildew mixed with something pungent, a mixture between humans and time. There wasn't much inside. A bed made from wooden planks, a few old tin cans, scraps of tattered fabric. But on the wooden wall, they saw scratch marks with fingernails, thin, thick, and many, as if someone had been locked in here, trying to escape, day after day. Right behind the door, the iron lock was broken in half, lying scattered on the ground. Marissa picked it up, her eyes shattered. David looked around. The light from the flashlight swept across the scratches like cuts. He imagined the girls using some sharp object to mark, to call for help. They had been here. They had survived. And they had been left behind. In the corner of the shack, beneath a layer of dry straw, was an object that Nathan accidentally kicked. They bent down, brushed away the straw, and discovered an old piece of paper folded in quarters, clipped in a small leather-bound notebook. A hand-drawn map, scribbled in ballpoint pen, hatch, next to the tree with moss-covered stones, an arrow pointing southwest. David opened his phone, checked the direction. Less than 3 kilometers away, he said. His voice couldn't hide the tension. Nathan looked at his watch, then looked at the darkening sky. If we leave now, we might make it before it gets completely dark. Marissa nodded, as never so decisive. Let's go. On the way, they crossed large tree roots blocking the path, climbed over slippery rocks, and clung to ancient roots to avoid falling. Each step was like stepping on a part of the memory that was thought to be asleep, but was actually just waiting to be found. Marissa said nothing throughout the journey. She just clutched the tiny bracelet that they had just found next to the wooden shack. Amber's bracelet, broken in half. One side still had the inscription, A and A forever. You cried here, didn't you? She whispered again, as if speaking to the air. You waited and cried. When they reached the location marked on the map, the sky had turned purple. Under a large tree covered with green moss was a strange stone slab, placed unnaturally, covering a small hole. Nathan used a crowbar to pry it open gently. The stone slab popped open, revealing a deep, damp underground passage, the pungent smell of decay rising up. No one said anything. No one needed to say anything. They just looked at each other, then stepped down in turn, each step, each breath, as if entering the heart of the nightmare they had lived through for the past 5 years. And there, in the earth, the answer was waiting for them. An answer that was not easy to accept, not gentle, but it was the truth they had been waiting for many years. No one said anything when the stone door opened. Nathan shined the flashlight down. The light shone through the dusty haze, revealing a stone staircase leading deep into the ground. Wind blew up from the cellar, not strong, but pungent. A smell that David recognized as soon as he touched it. The smell of people, the smell of time, the smell of years buried alive. Marissa held David's hand tightly. In her palm, Amber's bracelet was still there. It was no longer an object, but something anchoring her from collapsing between the boundary of life and death. Nathan went first, holding the light. David followed. Marissa stepped last, slowly, each footstep as if placed on her own heart. The stone staircase led them down to a dark, narrow-domed space, the brick walls damp and mottled. A narrow passageway branched off to the left, only tall enough for one person to walk hunched over. Old wooden beams supported the cellar roof, some of them rotten, dripping water. On the walls were traces of survival, handprints in the dirt, scribbled drawings, lines in old dried blood. Friday? Not sure. Kira has a fever. Help. April. Keep me awake. Someone read our names. David stepped closer to a wall. Right below the dried blood that had dried and formed a shape like a teardrop was the line engraved with a knife. No one is coming. He swallowed hard. His throat felt squeezed. He reached out and touched the line, then turned away, because he didn't dare imagine the moment his daughter had sat here, her hand shaking but still able to carve each letter, each stroke like that. A metal door was at the end of the cellar, rusted lock, but not completely closed. David pushed it gently. The hinge squeaked like a lament after years of silence. The flashlight shone inside. A small room, low ceiling, bare cement walls. 3 thin mattresses, rotten, damp, torn. A small table with a notebook. A few pens with no ink. A plastic bucket used to hold water now dried out. And 3 bodies, but only one was still breathing. In the left corner of the room, Hannah lay on her side, her long hair covering half her face. Her eyes closed, her hands holding a small notebook to her chest. Her body was cold and stiff, but a faint smile was still there, as if she had just had a beautiful dream. David bent down. In Hannah's hand was a folded piece of paper. He opened it, the light shining through. Sorry, I can't wait any longer. I miss Mom. I'm so tired. But don't blame me, okay? Amber Nathan turned away. Marissa collapsed beside the girl's body. She wasn't Hannah's mother, but she understood. A mother's heart is wide enough to hurt for all the children who were left behind without anyone asking. A few steps away, Kira lay still, her hands placed on her chest as if sleeping. There were no signs of struggle, no blood. She had died a few days ago, according to Nathan's estimate. Maybe because of a fever, maybe because of infection. But for sure, no one saved her. In the furthest corner, next to the black and dusty wall, April sat curled up. She didn't look up, didn't react when the light shined on her. Her hands hugged her knees, her eyes wide open, unblinking, empty as dead water. David approached, sat down. April, no response. Honey, it's Dad. She turned her head very slowly, as if that movement required more strength than running away. Her swollen and sunken eyes stared at him, lifeless. No joy, no tears, no faith. April, Marissa called, her voice choked. It's Mom, it's me. She frowned, as if hearing something vague. Then, softly, very softly, April whispered, Everyone left us behind. Marissa slumped to the ground. She didn't cry, didn't utter a word, just clenched her hands to her chest as if someone had just crushed her heart. David was also silent. He wanted to hug his daughter, wanted to touch her, wanted to pull her back from that pit. But April's eyes made him understand. This girl was no longer the April who used to giggle on the bus. She was a survivor, but a survivor of something no one deserved to experience. April was taken out of the cellar on a stretcher. She didn't say anything more, didn't react when the sunlight shone on her face, just closed her eyes, as if that light was the enemy. Marissa walked beside the stretcher, her hand never leaving her daughter's cold hand. The girl's hands were rough, her nails broken, many small scars, evidence of how many times she had tried to survive in the dark. David walked last. Looking back at the cellar door being sealed off by the police, he wondered who locked the children here. Why? Who had been silent all those years? But that wasn't what he thought about the most. What hurt him more was, if Nathan hadn't found that piece of fabric, if there wasn't the line April G. Swing, then his daughter could have died in that cellar. No one would have known. No one would have remembered. And he, a father, would forever live on earth, believing that his child had been laid to rest while she was screaming, crying for help in silence. When the ambulance left, Nathan stood next to David. He didn't say anything, just gave David the piece of paper found in April's pocket, crumpled, wet, and stained with blood. If anyone reads this, please tell our story. We weren't just victims. We were people who lived, who endured, and who loved each other until our last breath. David put it in his wallet, folded carefully, like a promise, that, from now on, his daughter would never have to wait in silence again. The Green family's house had never been so quiet, but it had also never been so full of life. Not laughter, not hurried footsteps on the stairs, but the silent life of a person who had just returned from a realm deeper than death, where there was no light, no time, no future. April was brought home after 3 days of treatment and preliminary psychological monitoring at the hospital. The doctors concluded, not life-threatening, but severe trauma, needs time to recover. Marissa had prepared everything. April's bedroom had been kept the same for 5 years. Still, the star-patterned pillow, the creaky old wooden cabinet, the desk by the window with the white rabbit lamp, the one April had chosen on the last family picnic. But April didn't go in there. She stood at the door, looked in, then backed away. Her hands clenched the sleeves. The panicked look was wordless, as if that room was a trap and it was all a trick. Finally, she went into the living room, sat down on the sofa, didn't take off her shoes, didn't say a word. The first day, April only looked out the window, didn't blink, didn't leave. David tried to ask, "Do you want to eat something?" She didn't answer, didn't turn around either. Marissa placed a bowl of hot porridge on the table. "I made your favorite. You don't have to eat it right away. I'll leave it here." April glanced at the bowl of porridge, then turned away. She didn't blame her, just poured another glass of water, placed it next to it. In the evening, she wouldn't go to bed, sat curled up in the corner of the chair, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide open all night. David didn't sleep. He sat on the stairs, listening to every sound in the house, each movement of his daughter like a fragile signal of survival. Every time he heard the rustling of fabric, he held his breath. Early in the morning, when he went downstairs, he saw Marissa folding the blanket, the bowl of porridge from last night still untouched, ice cold. But she didn't throw it away, just quietly cooked another bowl. On the third day, April woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, screaming silently. David rushed in, but as soon as he reached the door, she ran into the closet, slammed the door shut, panting. He stood still, didn't dare to open the door. Marissa came later, gently sat on the floor, her back against the closet. "I'm sitting here. Whenever you want to come out, I'll still be here." No answer, but the heavy breathing in the closet gradually slowed down. An hour later, the door opened slightly. April didn't look at anyone, quietly crawled out, huddled in the corner of the chair as if nothing had happened, as if she herself didn't understand why she was so afraid. On the 5th day, she started calling David Uncle, called Marissa Aunt. "Does Uncle need me to help with anything?" The voice was small, very small. David stood still. His face relaxed as he tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "No need. You rest." Marissa didn't react to that way of addressing them. She just replied, "Aunt made your favorite honey butter cookies. You might not be able to eat them yet, but whenever you're ready, I'll always bake more." Every night, Marissa placed a glass of warm milk on the table next to the sofa, where April was still sleeping. A soft pillow was placed near the door, along with a thin blanket. No pressure, no words. She didn't expect her daughter to drink that glass of milk, didn't expect her to return to the room. She just put it there as a sign of love, persistence, without the need for thanks. David was different. He didn't dare to go into the living room at night, only looked from the crack in the door, sometimes just to check if April was still there. still breathing, still alive. He used to be a strong, knowledgeable, rational father, but now, just seeing his daughter lying still, not crying, not screaming, he felt lucky. A week passed, not much improvement. But once, Marissa touched April's hand when giving her a glass of milk. She recoiled, instinct, but this time, didn't pull it away completely. Her hand was still on the table, trembling slightly, not looking at her mother, but not avoiding. Marissa didn't cry. She just placed her hand next to it, close but not touching, like a candle quietly lit next to the darkness. Then she said, very softly, "You don't need to forgive. You don't need to believe me right now. I just ask you, let me be near." April didn't answer, but her hand was still there, next to her mother's hand, not leaving. Life returned not loudly, no cheers, no brilliant turning points, just an eye less tense, a longer sleep than 3 hours, once daring to sit at the same table without turning away. David recorded each milestone. He marked in his notebook, Day 10, April held the spoon herself. Day 13, listened to music without panicking. Day 15, looked at mom once, longer than 3 seconds. And on day 17, for the first time, David saw his daughter sleeping peacefully. Not startled, no sweat. He stood outside the door, looking for a long time, wanted to capture that moment, but his hand trembled, couldn't press the camera. He turned away, leaned his back against the wall, and cried. Marissa found him in the kitchen, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking like a child. She didn't say anything, just came closer, wrapped her arms around him from behind. For the first time, after a very long time, they didn't need words to understand each other. Both knew. The journey was long. What April had lost couldn't be regained. But she was here, with them, still breathing, still alive. And that was enough, at least for today. Since the discovery of the girls, the police began to return to the underground cellar to search more thoroughly. No longer the indifference, no longer the cold shake of the head of those who had said, "The case is closed." Now, every eye avoided looking directly at David and Marissa, not because of guilt, but because of shame. An investigation team was sent down to the cellar. This time there were enough tools, thermal scanners, lighting cameras, protective gear. But what they found wasn't in the technical records or the analysis reports. It was in a small wall niche, hidden by a discolored brick. Nathan was the first to discover it. When his hand pried the brick out, everyone held their breath. Inside was an old tin box, rusty with fingernail marks scratching away the paint. He lifted it up, gently opened the lid. Inside were things that seemed worthless. A few crumpled pieces of paper, a small notebook, 3 letters folded with faded elastic bands, and a piece of sheet music, smudged but still with the first line clear. Marissa walked over. No one stopped her. No one dared. She didn't need to ask, just looked at the handwriting and knew. Amber, Kira, Hannah. Each stroke, each fold, as if those 3 daughters were whispering for the last time to this world. The first letter had lines written in blue crayon, faded by sun and moisture. "If Mom is reading this, I'm sorry I wasn't as strong as you thought. I love Mom. I love Dad and April. Live for me. Don't fall because of me. Because if Mom falls, I won't be able to leave peacefully." Amber Marissa didn't cry right away. She sat down, holding the paper as if holding her daughter's last breath. Her lips were pressed tight, her eyes closed as if she wanted to carve each word into her heart. David stepped behind her, placed his hand on her shoulder. His hand trembled. When she gave him the letter, he read it once, then suddenly collapsed, his hands covering his face. For the first time after 5 years, after so many attempts to be a strong husband, a calm father, David sobbed like a child. Kira's notebook was wrapped in an old piece of clothing, perhaps Rachel's. Inside were pages full of words, but not desperate diary entries as everyone imagined. Day 41. April told the story about the fat cat that couldn't fit through the drain pipe. We laughed like crazy. Hannah even imitated the cat's voice, just like the real thing. Day 62. If there is a day of freedom, I will learn to bake and sit in the kitchen with Mom. I remember the sound of the knife tapping on the cutting board. Remember the smell of hot oil. Remember even the times I was scolded for sneaking food. Day 83. Amber is weak now, but still tells ghost stories to scare us. That mouth really never stops. Marissa read, smiling, crying, a choked smile. Not because of pain, but because of love. Because the little girls had used laughter to light up the darkness. The last page was an unfinished song, signed Hannah, no date. Only 3 lines. If I wake up tomorrow in the sunshine with Mom waiting on the porch, I will sing my good morning song again. Then the line abruptly stopped in the middle of a musical note. Marissa held the piece of paper, raised it to her cheek. You wrote that, but you didn't have time to sing it. I will sing it for you. Nathan stood in silence. He didn't record, didn't take pictures. He just watched, his heart heavy knowing that justice, even if it came, couldn't bring those children back to life. But at least today, their memories had been heard. That day, David didn't go home right away. He walked around the town, still holding Amber's letter, as if afraid of losing it. When he got home, he went to his study, took out his wallet, and clipped the letter into the leather wallet he always carried with him. You'll go with Dad, wherever, he whispered. Marissa was different. She didn't want to fold it, didn't want to put it away. She framed the letter, hung it in the hallway, where the first sunlight shone every morning. You told me to live for you, she said, so I will live, and let the light touch you every day. April that day stood silently on the stairs. She looked at the letter, said nothing, but when she passed through the hallway, she lightly touched the glass. Marissa saw it. Didn't ask, didn't call, but knew. April had recognized that handwriting, recognized her sister. That evening, for the first time since coming home, April proactively sat down at the dinner table, said nothing, looked at no one, but it was already a big step. Marissa didn't ask if she would eat. She just put a small portion. April took the spoon, raised it to her lips, slowly, then ate more. David looked at his wife, his eyes red. Their hands touched lightly under the table, not to celebrate, but just to remind each other that we're still here, and so are you. The story of the messages in the cellar was published in the press. People called the girls the 7 forgotten candles. But for Marissa, David, and the remaining families, they were not victims. They were survivors, even if some had passed away. The next day, Marissa wrote a line on paper, pasted it next to Amber's framed letter. Your names will not be forgotten, no longer in a sentence, but in the hearts of the living. March. Spring came late. The wild peach branches in the backyard had just sprouted buds, and the sun only dared to peek lightly through the gray clouds, as if probing whether the people in the house were ready to welcome the light. April still wasn't the girl from years ago, and probably never would be, but she had begun to live again. Not just breathing, not just opening her eyes, but living. Not with great things, but with the smallest things, like the way Marissa taught her to knead dough for the first time. That morning, Marissa placed a bowl of flour, a glass of fresh milk, and a block of unsalted butter on the table. You don't need to be able to do it, she said. Just wanting to do it is enough. April stared at the bowl of flour. Her hand trembled slightly, but after a few seconds, she slowly dipped her hand in. The flour stuck to her fingers, cold and soft. She frowned, perhaps remembering the other cold things that had stuck to her hands. But then, her hand began to move, kneading, rolling, molding. No one said anything, only the sound of the dough squelching and the light shining through the window, illuminating April's hair, making it show a brown gold color that had been thought to be forgotten. Marissa stood beside her, not reminding or correcting either. She just let her daughter's hands get reacquainted with the concept of creating something. At the end of the morning, a loaf of bread unevenly risen, with cracked surfaces, but smelling of butter and milk from the oven. April looked at it for a long time, then unexpectedly smiled, very lightly, as if afraid if she smiled bigger, the bread would disappear. Marissa saw that smile. She didn't react, just turned away, wiped her hands, to hide her eyes that had blurred with tears. The next day, Nathan came to ask April to go to the forest. At first, she refused, but Marissa didn't force her. Just gently placed a small backpack next to her. Inside was a bottle of water, a handkerchief, and a box of cookies that April herself had made yesterday. On Tuesday morning, she proactively put on her coat, wore her backpack, then opened the door and went out to where Nathan was waiting. All day, they didn't say much. Nathan just pointed to the claw marks on the tree trunk, saying, "Bear," but gentle, just likes to scratch for fun. April didn't answer, but she bent down, touched the scratch marks. Later, she quietly stepped back, placed her hand next to the mark, as if to compare sizes. At a stream, Nathan sat down on a rock, pointed. "Hear that sound? Magpie robin. If you listen carefully, you'll know it's calling for rain." April closed her eyes, listened. The wind blew through her hair. The water flowed babbling. The sound of birds like small pieces of sound pieced together into a gentle symphony. When she opened her eyes, she whispered, "There are no iron doors here." Nathan didn't answer. He just nodded, a deep nod, like a thank you. A few weeks later, Marissa found the camera forgotten in the storage room. It was an old camera, still working. She put it on the dining table, didn't leave any more messages. April saw it. She touched the shutter button lightly, didn't turn on the camera, just put her hand on it, then left. The next day, the camera disappeared from the table. David discovered that a few days later, when his phone received a message from April's number, "I took this because it's warm." It was a photo. A scene of the corner of the kitchen, where Marissa was using her hands to knead dough. The light cast a soft yellow-orange streak covering her hands. Those hands were no longer smooth, had wrinkles, scars, but exuded a feeling of solidity, safety. David looked at the photo for a long time. Then he printed it, framed it, placed it right on his desk. He didn't say anything to April. But that day, he brought home a new roll of film, put it on her table, next to breakfast. No one mentioned it. But the next day, the film had been used half. That day, when Marissa was slicing carrots, the knife slipped off her finger. Blood flowed. April was standing nearby washing rice. When she saw the blood, she froze for a second, then ran over, flustered. "Mom!" Marissa looked up. Her eyes widened. Not because of the wound, but because of the way April called her. She also realized it. Her mouth paused, her hand pulled back. But Marissa had reached out with her other hand to grasp that hand, held it tightly, didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't analyze, just embraced her daughter, in the kitchen, amidst the smell of blood and the smell of warm rice. April stood still in that embrace. At first, she was stiff. Then gently, she also squeezed back, not tightly, but enough to feel that she was embracing something more real than herself. From that day on, April no longer called them aunt, uncle. Not yet mom, dad completely, but enough to feel one thing. She was coming back, not just home, but back to herself. April's first photo album began with photos of broken branches, cracked earth, dry roots, cold, emotionless things. But gradually, there were more. Nathan's fleeting smile when he saw a bird escaping its cage. The scene of bread with cracked surfaces, but light shining on the crispy crust. Marissa's hand placed on the back of a chair, where she often leaned when tired. And a self-portrait. April turned her face away, but in the mirror reflection, we saw light shining on half her face. Not brilliant, but clearly existing. April pasted a piece of paper on the cover of the album. Not normal yet. But it's a start. Marissa read it. She didn't fix it, didn't praise it, just sat next to her daughter, poured a glass of warm milk, and the light outside the window finally shone at the right time. Marissa wrote the first letter on a summer morning when the sun hadn't risen high and the kitchen still smelled of fresh bread. April was sitting on the porch, holding a camera, her eyes on the lavender bush her mother had just replanted. She didn't know what her mother was writing in the study, and Marissa didn't say. She didn't plan this. No one asked. Not to end a chapter, nor to start something new. Simply, she just felt it was time to give back the voice to those who were still silent. That letter wasn't long. But each sentence, each word was written by hand, by the same hands that had hugged her daughter when she was just a child who often dreamed during meals. Dear fathers and mothers who lost their children in the accident that year, I am Marissa Green, mother of April and Amber. We once thought we had lost both, and at times I even practiced living as a shadow. But the truth is, the loss doesn't end with death. It lives on persistently in every memory, every moment that our children should have been present. Recently, I found April again, but I still lost Amber. And the most painful thing is, for so many years we were never allowed to talk about our children. Today, I'm not writing to tell about what happened. I just want to say one thing. Our children loved each other in the dark, kept each other alive, told stories, dreamed, laughed, even though the world out there no longer heard. I am writing this letter, not expecting a reply, just hoping that if one day you need someone to remember together, to call out the names of your children together, then I am here. We can hurt, but we don't have to hurt alone. She signed her name, folded the letter, printed each copy, put it in a handmade envelope, wrote the names of each family, the parents of Rachel, of Kira, of Hannah, of Lily, of Emily. 5 names, 5 lives. Marissa didn't print stamps. She personally brought them to each house, knocked on the door, left the letter in the mailbox, or handed it directly if she met someone. Didn't explain, didn't ask anything, just smiled and bowed her head. A week later, in the late afternoon, her door opened to welcome a silver-haired woman, her face haggard. Her hand held the letter, crumpled and stained with a few streaks of water. The person said nothing, just came forward, hugged Marissa tightly, squeezing as if she had been waiting for that embrace for a long time. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "My child, Kira. She used to tell a lot about April. Thank you for keeping her alive in her heart." Marissa didn't answer. Her tears fell on the other person's shoulder, but this time it was tears of understanding, no longer alone. The first meeting took place simply in the backyard of the greenhouse, where April had once placed the camera to try to capture the light through the apple tree. There were no big tables and chairs, no speeches, just a few cups of tea, a little cake, and people sitting in a circle. David opened with a concise sentence. "We're not here to relive death. We're here to call back the life of the children who existed, who loved, and who never gave up." A father read a poem his daughter had written. A mother brought Lily's last doll, still wearing the old worn pink dress. Some held framed pictures, some were just silent, but all had one thing in common. For the first time, they were allowed to talk about their children without having to lower their voices. April sat on the far outside, holding a small piece of paper. When it was her turn, she stood up. No one urged, no one encouraged. She just stood straight, looked into everyone's eyes, then slowly read. Their names are Amber, Kira, Hannah, Lily, Rachel, Emily. They are not just victims. They are my friends. They are my family. They are the ones who kept me alive. I read their names, not for anyone to miss them, but so that they can continue to be present in this life. She folded the paper, sat down. Her eyes were wet, but not trembling, not avoiding, not running away. David squeezed his wife's hand tightly. Marissa said nothing, just turned to her daughter, placed her hand on April's knee. A touch very light, very gentle, but enough for the girl to look up at her with softened eyes. From then on, every month they met again, in the backyard of someone's house, or sometimes just a walk in the park. No need for a reason, no need for a name. They called each other those who still kept the memory. Marissa became a regular letter writer, this time sending them to invite, to inquire, or just to share a photo that April had just taken. Sunlight through the crack in the door, a cake burned on one corner, or old shoes placed next to the windowsill. Each photo had a handwritten note. This cake is like the one the day Rachel slipped. This light makes me remember the time Emily told a story about the stars. This cracked wall seems to be where Hannah used to draw a flower with her finger. Each photo was an unfinished story, continued by those who remained. One evening, when Marissa was putting letters into envelopes, April walked in, standing behind. "Mom, can you add my name to the letter next time?" Marissa looked up. "Of course, honey. What name do you want to sign?" April smiled, very softly. "April Green." "Just that." She smiled, patted her daughter's hand lightly. "Your name is always there." On the desk, Marissa framed another new line, placed next to Amber's letter. "Your names should not only exist in the sentence, but in everyone's heart." And so those names, thought to have fallen into oblivion, continued to live through stories, through memories, through each handwritten letter and hastily taken photograph. 1 year since April returned. No one in the Green family used the word anniversary when referring to this day, nor did anyone call it Amber's Day of Loss. They called it by the simplest name, Amber's Day. That morning, it didn't rain. The sky was clear but cool. The soft sunlight covered a thin layer of gold on the backyard, where David had just made a small flower bed, planting the white chrysanthemums that Amber had once loved. In the house, there were no funeral flowers, no guests, no condolences. There was only a corner that kept Amber's photos. April stood there often. She stood silently for a long time. No one spoke. No one came forward. Then her voice rang out, softly, roundly, clearly each word. "I'm sorry for leaving you behind." There were no tears, but each word was like a knife cutting into the hearts of those who heard. Not because of pain, but because that gentleness had been paid for with so many nights of silent crying, so many months unable to touch the light. David came forward, said nothing, just placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. His hand was warm, steady. April didn't turn around, but her breathing slowed down, as if that touch was a reminder. "Dad is here." Marissa stood behind, holding a cup of tea that was still steaming. She didn't come closer right away, just looked at the two of them, her eyes tearing up. But this time, the tears no longer had the coldness of sadness. It was tears of something that had closed. April lit 3 incense sticks, stuck them into the urn. She stepped back 1 step, bowed her head. Her hands were still clenched, but were no longer trembling. "You used to say if I wasn't good at drawing, I should write. If I couldn't write, I should take photos. As long as I could tell the beautiful things you didn't have time to tell." She turned to her mother, nodded slightly. "I will tell, Mom. I will tell for you." Marissa stepped forward, embraced her daughter from behind, a gentle, non-binding embrace, but full of love. April didn't shrink back. On the contrary, she turned around, hugged her mother tightly for the first time. No avoidance, no fear. Just a young girl, finally daring to rest her head in the arms of the person who had waited for her for 5 years in silence. David stepped forward, wrapped his arms around both of them. A 3-person embrace. No more distance, no more aunt, uncle, no more layers of pain. April breathed out softly, as if she had just released a burden. "I will go, Amber," she said softly, looking up at the photo frame. "But I will continue to go with you, in my heart." That evening, April sat alone in the room that a year ago she didn't dare to enter. On the wall, the photo of Amber and April laughing in the 11th grade camping trip had been hung again. Below the photo was a small bookshelf, not many, but full of photo books, poetry, and blank notebooks. April took out a new notebook, wrote the first line, "The first day of living without fearing I won't be able to live." A week later, April submitted an application for a short course in photography and storytelling through images. When asked, reason for choosing this major? Component placement. She only wrote one sentence, "Because there are stories that need to be told, with both light and dark." She gave the paper to her father to see. David read it, smiled, "And you're the best storyteller Dad has ever known." April smiled lightly. No avoidance. At the end of the summer, the Green family went camping for the first time in many years. The place they chose was a grassy area near the edge of the forest, not far from where everything had started, but not too close to scare April. That evening, they lit a campfire. David told old stories, not to recall the sadness, but to keep the fire burning for the memory. Marissa made hot cocoa. April took pictures of the fire, tree branches, her parents' eyes, one photo. She set the timer, ran back, sat between her parents. The photo printed out later was framed and hung in the living room. Below the photo, Marissa wrote in pencil, "The first hug," and also the first time daring to let go. No one in their family forgot the past. But now, they were no longer victims of it. April wasn't the kidnapped girl of years ago. She was a survivor, and continued to live with her story, with love that was no longer interrupted. David and Marissa were no longer desperate parents, living in doubt. They were the people who had gone through the darkness with their daughter, and returned.